First off, thank you very much for coming to my talk today. It's great to see the room as full as it is. Michael Coburn, I've been with Percona about 11 years, and I've always been on the consulting team except for a short little stint, about 3 years when I was on I was a product manager for PMM. So I've been working with MySQL for around 15 years, and over the last, I don't know how long, probably the last 2 years anyway, we've been focused a lot on migrations, whether they're upgrades or migrations to different platforms. But when we move, we tend to upgrade. So I've been focusing a lot on anywhere from 5.5 up to 8.0, going into RDS, or whether it's onto compute platforms or some other destination, but it's generally been 8.0. And what I want to do is I want to take a chance to share some of the things that I've learned going through it. This isn't a demo-based class. This is more about the process that we want to take, the best way to do it, call it the best practices, and then some of the gotchas that you're going to get. I won't mention directly the company names, but I will be using scenarios talking about large data sets and then also about large environments. So where I really want to start off, I want to understand a little bit about the audience here. Is anybody running MySQL 8 yet? Maybe raise your hand. Okay, a good 50%. Does anybody work with data sets larger than 1 terabyte? Pretty much everybody. Okay, good. I'll keep that in mind as we go through the slide deck here. This silly picture was from December. This is with Peter and I. Peter's really gotten into fitness over the last couple years. He's doing a lot of running and also mountaineering. So we climbed a mountain in December. We went up to 5,600 meters, and he had a small breakage of his glasses, and I think he actually ended up hurting his eyeball because he got frozen eyeball, but we still had a fun time going up to the top of the mountain. Okay, enough about the silly stuff. Let's focus on the technical bits of doing an upgrade. The goal, generally, I would assume, for most of my customers anyway, they want to do it in a 0 downtime or as low of an outage as possible. That's a major requirement. Number 2, no data loss. In this day and age, we shouldn't be losing anything, especially if you're using InterDB. You have a transactional database, we have replication, we have tools that have been battle tested in years of production usage. There shouldn't be any data loss. So those are the 2 main criteria that I take when I go into a customer engagement. You need to know, though, you need to ask some questions about your environment. You need to understand, thanks to some tools that the Oracle team has pulled together, particularly around the MySQL shell, there's this feature called util check for server upgrade. I'll get into some detail on it, but it's the bee's knees. It'll really help save you some problem up front and give you some things to do before you get into actual upgrade motion. Once you've done some research on your environment, you need to now go and build out some sort of future environment. Now, generally, you're not going to be migrating from a primary and replicas to just a primary. You're going to need to now redeploy everything that you've started with. So keeping it simple, if you've got a primary and a couple read replicas, we're going to build a replication hierarchy that drops down lower. Your MySQL 8 will replicate from your 5.7 or earlier version, and then you'll hang some replicas off of that. Okay, so the idea is you're going to probably, well, my recommendation is generally deploy new instances. Don't try to do in-place upgrades and try to reuse that same hardware. Especially if you're hosted somewhere in a cloud platform or you're using virtualization, it's much easier to deploy new instances, fail over, and delete the old stuff. Okay, so that's what I'm talking about here in number 2, building out your replication hierarchy. We also want to make sure that our queries don't get any slower or return even worse, some errors or different result sets, because that will obviously bite you, and that will be very difficult to track down. So I'm going to show some methodology of using collection of slow log, parsing it with query digest to reduce the quantity of it, and then using PT upgrade to actually evaluate out what the query results are and whether they're meaningful or not. It's optional, number 4, that you want to validate the replication hierarchy. Do you have all the same accurate data? For that, you can use PT table checksum. I'll talk a little bit about that. And then you can use PT table sync if you identify any errors. We have yet another tool from Percona Toolkit to fix it. And then last, you need to do a failover. This can be done through some automated tools like Orchestrator, combination with Proxy SQL, and it can be just kind of magic. Or you can take the initiative and say, okay, manually, we're going to stop writes on the database. I'm going to set read-only mode. I'm going to have my app servers get turned off. I'm going to make sure replication's caught up. I'm going to point my app server, and I'm going to turn off read-only, and away we go, and we can write data again. Okay? So there's a bunch of different ways, depending on your environment, how you're going to get there. I'm going to treat it at a more logical level and just say what are the steps that you need to actually execute. Okay. But first and foremost, let's talk a little bit about why you might want to upgrade. It's new code. New code means new opportunities for you, right? So there's a whole bunch of different levels of improvements, both for a DBA and from the developer side. Some of them I've used, some of them I haven't really explored too much. I'm aware of CTEs, but I've never used them. I haven't seen any customers leveraging them yet. Not that it's not a good feature or anything, it's just, it's maybe a little more esoteric, a little more niche. But certainly some things around data dictionary we care about now, or we're able to make sure that InnoDB is much more crash resistant than it has been in the past. You know, we've moved the MySQL schema, for example, into InnoDB when it used to be MyISAM. Some great improvements like that. And I do really want to acknowledge the value that both Kenny and LaFred, or really the MySQL team, has done for us here. I think it's been very helpful to have a much more robust and powerful MySQL system that survives crashes a lot better. One of the other neat ones that you can use once you get into 8 is the clone plugin that lets you do things just using a couple commands will bootstrap a replica for you. Whereas, you know, we used to have to do this by backups and restores and things like that. The clone plugin is pretty rad, but it only works once you get into 8.0. That's one of the reasons. The last one I'll leave you on is that it's in October of this year that 5.7 goes end of life. Right? So if you have a support contract with a provider, maybe they'll be willing to extend it, but practically speaking, you're not going to see any new features and maybe only security fixes, and maybe not even those going into 5.7. So it behooves you to look at that new version, which is MySQL 8, and start planning your upgrade. I also like interactive sessions, so if anybody has any questions, please feel free to raise your hand and interrupt me, okay? This, I'm not going to go through the whole list. This is what Oracle published back early on when they released, it was somewhere in the early 8 series on what all the features are. So my earlier slide was just about what was interesting to me. There's a lot out there, okay? A lot of justification why you might want to move forward with an 8.0 upgrade. Okay, what does it mean to build at your replication hierarchy? I've talked about it a little bit before, and it's not so much about what you end up with your hierarchy. The important thing is you're probably going to use asynchronous replication. The question or the challenge becomes, how do you actually get there? How do you restore? How do you back up? And so I'm just going to spend a couple minutes talking about the different backup types so that you have an idea of how you can get there. And particularly, that's where the question around your data set size comes in. As we're all aware, oh, go ahead.
So here's my question. You're recommending building an entirely new hierarchy rather than doing the in-place upgrades. But then it leaves you with the issue of how on earth you're going to rebuild a 16 terabyte database and then catch up on all the replication you missed in the middle. Why?
Well, fair question. The question is, why would you go to the extent of building out a replication environment rather than doing in-place upgrades? From my perspective, I'm going to find it probably simpler and a simpler method that I can rinse and repeat. My job as a consultant is to go into a lot of shops and do something that I know has worked in the past, right? It's not to say that in-place won't work, but I would still struggle to identify a better value, or it doesn't give you as easy of a rollback. If things don't go well, you've changed that data set. You can't go back to 5.7. You're going to have to dump and load, right? Whereas in this mode, anything that you've added below can be thrown away and rebuilt again.
Technically, you can just do one clone. If you're working on AWS, take a snapshot and just...
Good point. Yeah.
How long does it take to rehydrate that snapshot? How have you damaged your recovery record during that in-place upgrade? Like there's a whole bunch of stuff that you potentially could lose.
Is there instance available of that size?
And also, when you're upgrading, I think it's again choice whether you want to do in-place upgrade or with a new hardware, right? So if you
I
are
think it's a trade-off. It's a business trade-off that everybody has to decide.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And in the cloud environment, I think it's very easier to spin new hardware and start going from there.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to do in-place upgrade, I prefer to do in-place upgrade because, like say, when you start upgrading, you have multiple replicas. First, you start replicas, and then you move forward to the primary, and also you have kind of like when you are upgrading the primary, you are making sure like you should be like a rollback immediately, right? So that you have either have one extra node for the primary, keeping the old, and upgrade the existing one, upgrade the new one, and change the topology.
Mm-hmm.
So it depends.
Mm-hmm.
On the use case.
Technically, you only have to do one, right?
Yeah.
You're spinning up new instances, and you have 8 clone plugin buffer.
Yeah. If you don't have automation, then it's going to take a lot of time, right? If you have automation, right, then it's not bad,
Yeah, that's a fair point.
Any sort of recap?
Well, both are valid options, right? Whether you do replication-based failover. To me, this gives me a better way of rolling back any situations I'm in. I haven't destroyed my earlier environment. I might have some writes that showed up in 8.0. I can recover those with a bin log and replay them. We'll have downtime, but I can tell a customer 100% I'll get you back without a loss of a transaction if I'm doing everything right. Whereas with an in-place, you know, that data set has changed. Snapshots might make that paradigm a little bit different. I can see also if we, as I go through all of this stuff, the check, util upgrade, all that other stuff, if you're doing all that and you're so confident, you feel good, you've done it in lower environments, that the upgrade's gonna go fine, sure, maybe your prod environment can go ahead with an in-place. Not to take the wind out of that sail. I think that could still be valid. Question?
So the problem with the one, I think, maybe biggest issue, besides like you pointed out with the time to recover for an in-place upgrade, the other issue I have is every major release, something slows down. Somebody's query somewhere slows down. Now, granted, we all say, you know, you should be testing this in UAT or QA or whatever for, you know, months, whatever. In reality, that doesn't always happen. You know, they don't have the same data set size, they don't have the same transactional throughput. So the reality is a lot of times you'll hit prod and you'll find some query that no longer behaves the way it did in the previous major release. Now, oftentimes the solution to that might be, you know, maybe you just need an extra index, probably not if you were doing your job well in the first place. What probably is needed is to rewrite the query and or the application. Now, granted, rewriting the query is going to be an application rewrite, but also it might be a significant code tweak to go with it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're doing an in-place upgrade, the time to deal with that, if you're doing it in place, is you're improving the chances you'll need to roll back to 5.7, deal with the impact, and then roll out again at a later date.
There is no
You'll have the
rollback
same
to 5.7.
scenario with your replication version, which of course I agree with. But it'll be easier, a far easier recovery.
I wouldn't say that there's no rollback. I would say that there's no easy rollback.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean,
Like Booking.com talks about how they roll back 2% of their environment. Talks, and one of them's coming up later. They had to because of these code changes that became too. Didn't notice that same day, but later on, and it just became necessary to roll back.
5.7 will replicate from 8.0, and 8.0 will replicate from 5.7, except for when you get into some UTF-8 changes in there. Replication will break. So you can roll for a little while with this mismatched versions and have yourself, you know, with some sort of a rollback. Thankfully, due to replication based. But maybe what oh, go ahead, Kenny. Okay. I think so.
why are you not considering MySQL shell dump code?
I know. That's a classic miss. I apologize. I did miss that. Yeah, because it's parallel even, isn't it? Well, good thing Dukos isn't here to talk about that. But
You can, for example, you don't have primary keys, you want hidden primary keys in 8.0. The MySQL shell dump and load can do it for you. You can change the character set, can do plenty of stuff. So dump and pump, you should remove them forever.
okay, fair enough. Fair point. The statement is that I've neglected one of the logicals, and it's the MySQL shell dump and load. Is that what it's called? Dump and load?
Dump and load utility.
Yeah. So, and there's a lot of manipulation of the data you can do on the fly there. Whereas, you know, we still think about the classic logical as MySQL dump and pdump or pump, which is parallel. Not to use that anymore. So I need to replace that first line with MySQL shell. But okay, let me get through this slide here. Just want to talk about just what the backup types are and where they're going to make sense and maybe where they might fall apart in your migration. right? So the first three are about logical. And what does that mean? It means you're going to go through the MySQL protocol, you're going to connect to it like a client, and you're going to dump out a bunch of insert statements and create tables. It's going to go into a text file, which is great. You can audit that, you can read it. The bummer is it can often be a very large file. It can take a very long time. That can lead to some other locks in your system. So doing logical with very large data sets is sometimes quite a frustrating endeavor. You still, with large data sets, you still might want to do that for a variety of reasons, but you might find you have to restart that process a lot.
And the rebuild, the restore from that logical is actually going to take a lot longer. The index rebuilds and that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. I happened to catch a piece of Lefred's talk yesterday where there was something about what could you disable that we can do that'll speed up the loads? The redo logs. The redo logs can be disabled in a very recent release, I think.
8:30.
So within the last year even.
Yeah. 30 is the redo log capacity dynamic.
So the point is that even in 8.0 we're seeing some features that can speed up the loading of data. But you're right, it will still be slower than doing some other physical backup. Okay. But why would you want to do this? In some cases, I'll go into a shop and I'll see that they have a 12 terabyte data set, and through some analysis of that schema, you'll discover that they've got quite a lot of fragmentation in there. And really the data set might only be 5 terabytes. And so dumping and loading gets you a recovery for a customer that could be on the terabyte level, and that's a material dollar amount that might represent something to them, and it's worthwhile spending the time to do a dump and load. So there's places in there when it makes sense to do logical. Another reason you might want to do it is if you're going through significant versions. If you dump it out, it's into the insert language, or I don't even know, like a logical language in a text file, and that will cleanly load into a much later version. It saves you having to do a lot of PXBs in between at each different version. Go ahead.
I would strongly suggest if somebody does the text for the logical dump and reload, that they disable any foreign keys if they have the load. You know, they might want to skip the indexes at first too, just to significantly speed
Yeah,
up.
there's some optimizations in there.
Yeah, from on-prem to cloud, logical it's needed if you want to. There is no way to do it.
Well, with Amazon, you can push to an S3 bucket and then import it in. So you can push a PXB to S3 and then bootstrap that as your RDS MySQL node. But your point is, or to repeat the question, if you're going into a database as a service, you generally need to be doing it through this logical method. Dump the text file, load it in through the MySQL client. Yeah. Okay, what's different? You've got physical. Physical is probably more appropriate if your data set's larger. Even if you see that there's a chance to maybe save some data, you go and run some like data space, maybe you'll run some alter tables later to recover that space. So you can still use PXB, pay the penalty of moving to still a larger data set that you need on disk footprint, and then recover the space later. It's also going to be faster on the backup and the recovery, okay? So that's where the physicals make a lot of sense. And then just so that we're all aware, the binary log is not, it's really its own backup, but it sort of is. It gives you a restore point to do point-in-time recovery. You're going to have your full, and then you're going to play things forward with your bin logs, okay? So I mentioned that now because later we're going to talk about this in some different ways. Okay, so you're eventually going to have to upgrade the data directory. Now, we used to have to use MySQL upgrade. It was a separate binary you'd run, and it would do a whole bunch of checks, and then you would start up your MySQL D. Well, now you don't need to do that. All of that logic has been baked into MySQL D, so you really just start the daemon against the data directory, okay? You probably need to do this sooner than later. I've been working with a customer in this room here who I shared a stage with, and we have a lot of back-end types to upgrade. It's not just one environment, and I can't, take a lot of attention on one thing at a time. I need to just get things moving a lot. So what I ended up doing is I would spin up a lot of nodes, I'd do the recovery, and I would just start MySQL 8 against it and see what I get. You go right to the error log and look for any errors that you need to take action on. They're going to be repair table this, or maybe change partitioning that. But they're going to give you in the error log some pretty actionable, at least where do I need to focus my attention. So that's what I'm getting at here. I don't count on my first launch of MySQL 8 to actually succeed. Great if it does, but mostly it won't. Check the error log, fix it back in 5.7, take a backup, restore it again to the data directory in your 8.0 host, and start MySQL 8 again. That's the routine that's been there's I guess ways to maybe shortcut that, but that's been quick enough for me to keep using a rinse and repeat mode on it, okay? Now, how do we do it so we don't spend too much time in that rinse and repeat? One cycle is probably enough. One cycle should be the max. There is this great tool which is part of MySQL Shell, and it will check. On the next slide, I've got a whole list of them. I think it's around 17 or so differences. A whole bunch of really important stuff and a bunch of minor things. This is the syntax you're going to run it. Okay, so obviously you need to appropriately choose the destination of it. The cool thing about it is you can give it a target version and it'll make the results much more specific. And the cool thing about this tool is because Oracle has a mode, at least in the 8.0, where they're introducing some significant changes in each release, which I think is great, but that could also lead to some breakage. It behooves you, once you're on 8 and you go from 8.0.30 to 8.0.32, you might want to just run the util check for server upgrade again, just to make sure that you got everything going. The point I'm trying to make is this works for your 5.7 to 8.0 and it works while you're in the 8.0 stream, and I assume every release after that, okay? In most recent, I think it was after 8.0.21 or something, their grants are a little bit less. It used to be all, and now you can do it with just reload, process, and select if you're very security conscious and want to control your grants, okay?
How long does that usually take?
Like seconds. Yeah, it should be, well, I mean, it depends, I guess, on, it has to recurse over every table. So they're,
It takes very long time. It does the check table on the each table.
yeah. Yeah, my experience has been, it's been low minutes at worst, but.
In my use case, when I ran it, it ran very long time, and I see it was doing the what you do for the check for the table, right? So it was doing the checking each and every table for it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There is, I think there is one issue somewhere where a query is not optimized, and it, depending what you have, can take minutes, but it's a bug that has been, let's say, considering right now, and changing that query takes. It's an information schema queries.
Okay. It dropped off a little bit. So, actually, there's 21 items that it'll output, at least in the example that I looked at. The ones in bold are the ones that I've had direct experience where it doesn't work unless you fix it. So, depending on how old you're upgrading from, the type around time has changed. We added, I think, 6 decimal places and things like that. So you need to actually do a repair on the table that has that date time column, okay? So that's what the first one's referring to. But what it's going to output, based on the syntax I showed earlier, is a big JSON file, and it's going to give you all of these sections, and it's going to give you actionable steps for each one. It's generally going to give you a link back to the documentation or Lefred's website or a bunch of different locations on like what you need to do about it and to understand what the problem is. So watch for the time changes. The DB objects. We have to be aware that in MySQL 8, well, in every version, they're expanding the list of reserved words. Well, there's a few new ones. The new word of groups. If your environment is a social media one or something around that, that's probably something you've named a table, groups. Okay, it doesn't mean you have to change the table name, but you do need to make sure you put backticks around it. Okay, otherwise your queries will not work when you go forward. It's just going to give an error. So it's important you look at what the output of the number 2 is there. Another one I've been seeing a lot is around partition tables. My fix had been just to run a null op, like a engine equals InnoDB, and it would clean it up. I didn't spend a lot of time trying to understand how we got into that situation because it was before me and I just needed to move on. But I saw it enough on enough of these different backend types that I'm going to call it out. So you'll see that in the output. You're going to say that this table isn't ready for upgrade and you need to run alter table on it. And then there's some, down here on 17, there's some things around, I want to say it's the SQL mode. There's obviously been some changes going from 5.7 to 8.0, and it's going to call them out. The reason it can tell some of this stuff is in the syntax, you'll notice that I also mention, I pass it the config path. So not only is it going to check the status of the server, it's also going to look at your config file and identify if there's anything that isn't going to be compatible going forward. Okay? So a lot of data comes out. If you're only doing it for one environment, it might be overwhelming. If you've got tens or hundreds of environments, you're going to eventually get quick at this and just know where to look. Some of these things, it doesn't really matter. It's not that big of a deal. Like if a system variable got removed, if you're not querying for it, who cares, right? But some of them are important. Okay? Okay, Now, I'm going to stick with my replication mode, not an in place, and that's why this is getting into your data consistency. Percona Toolkit involves, I don't know, 20 or 30 different binaries. It's been around for a very long time. If you're not familiar with it, it's totally worth bringing on board. It's going to make your life easier. Two of the tools are around data consistency, PT-table checksum and PT-table sync when it's got problems. A good model would be that you're always running PT-table checksum in your environment, whether it's around MySQL upgrades or whether it's just day in the life. It means you're protecting yourself against errant writes to replicas and introducing data changes there. You want to be aware before anybody else that there's differences between your replicas and your primary. Okay? This is an example that I've been using quite a bit. There's nothing so special about it. The only thing I want to call out on it, I didn't. I put it down here at the bottom. I've been messing around with changing the different functions. I had a 12 terabyte customer, and it was taking, as you can imagine, forever and ever to get the checksums done. I happen to be using Percona server. I changed the function away from, I think it's default CRC32 to this murmur hash thing. It was like a 9x or a 10x improvement. So if you're on Percona server and you're doing table checksum, you know when you do the install, it gives you load these 3 UDFs. Do that, and then use that function, and things will just go a lot faster. So that's just a pro tip that'll help you out. Okay? But the idea with PT-table checksum is you're telling it where to go. I like to watch it because a system's not doing it, I'm doing it. Recursion method is how do you identify the replicas? Just through process list is fine. I'm giving it a different table name. And what else? And I generally, because it's my replica environment, I don't care how long the lag's going to get. I don't want it stopping waiting for replication to catch up. Let it just get as long as it needs to and just keep running the chunks. Okay? Okay, so now you've done a routine and you're confident that your replica, your new environment, is in sync with your production side. Now we need to actually do the hard part, or the more important part, or probably the most important part. The tool that you're eventually going to use is PT Upgrade. PT Upgrade is designed to talk to 2 different nodes in your environment. You're going to pass it a slow log, and it will execute those queries against those 2 environments and compare the result sets. It's going to compare them based on the response time. Did the query get any slower? Did the query return different row counts? Did the query return the same row counts but in a different order? And finally, did it return any new warnings or errors? These are they're kind of a cascading scale of importance there. Maybe you don't care about warnings, your app doesn't care, but maybe you have a very responsive app that's going to blow up when it sees a new warning. That's up to you and your environment, but with this tool, you can identify those in advance. Okay, so what do? First off, you have to get the slow log running in your environment, right? That means going and probably to your primary and finding a way to capture queries at the best resolution you can get. At Percona, we'd rather see things with long query time equals 0, so we're just seeing everything. Hopefully you can support that. And it might only be an hour, or what I say to customers it could be 10 minutes. I just want to see a business cycle worth of activity on the database server and capture logs for that period. That might be in your situation, an hour, or 24 hours, or a week. It would be a bummer if it was a week, but anyway, point is, you want to have captured into that slow log every kind of query that might have executed in your environment. Now you have the slow log. You can then naively, not in a disrespectful way, but you can naively just take that slow log, which could be 100 gigs or a terabyte, and go and run it through PT Upgrade. This is a simple syntax. The host on the left is going to be your existing version, and the host on the right is going to be your upgrade version. So it's going to be 5.7 or 5.5 upgrading to 8.0. Okay? You're going to pass it the slow log and just capture the output, and you're going to read a relatively lengthy report. Okay, how can you make this better? Do I mention on the slide? I do. So use PT Query Digest with this sample option. And what it will do is it'll take your 100 gig or your terabyte file, stream through it, it'll output it in slow log format, so in slow log, out slow log, but with, in my case, sample 10, it will only capture 10 occurrences of an example query. So you're going to go from 100 gig to probably a few hundred meg of a file. And then you're going to use that refined file, the smaller slow, for your actual PT Upgrade test. So you're going to get your test done a lot quicker, okay? So that's been a really big win depending on how busy your environment, how large your slow log gets, okay? And the other pro tip in there is do it twice, because the servers you're running them against, here, the MySQL 5.7 and MySQL 8.0, will probably have different pages in the buffer pool. And so that means some of the queries will actually fetch things off of disk, and that's going to lead to a different query execution time. And I don't think that's fair. So I think it's better to just run and discard the first result set and run the PT Upgrade again. If you have 100 gigs, you're probably not going to like to hear that. But if you've done this routine down here, then it's trivial to run it twice because it'll be quick. Okay? But that's kind of a big thing, is to run it twice so you get accuracy in the query timing side. So this is an example of one of the pieces of output, or one of the query outputs in PT Upgrade. Arguably, I've got a couple feature requests in the toolkit to improve kind of the readability of it. I mean, I guess it's readable, but I don't know. I get myself kind of lost in what I'm looking at. So let's break it down. It's going to generate a hash of the query. The hash is really not relevant other than if you're going to go through multiple iterations of it and you want to track maybe the performance of the occurrence of a particular query. But it's a hash based on the query string. And the query string, what it actually does is we strip out, this is the actual query that would have been executed, an example of it. And this is the, there's got to be a word for it. The fingerprint, thank you, whoever said that. That's the fingerprint right there, and it calculates the hash on the fingerprint. And that's how you can have different values but always end up with the same hash, okay? And then down here is the most important part. It's going to show you left-hand side and right-hand side. So the VS will separate those two for you. And in this particular case, we've got some truncation going on. Is it significant? That's up to you to decide if you need to take action on it. The point of this tool, though, is to display where there are differences between versions, okay? So let's talk about some of the actions you can take on it here. Now, these are the ones that I've learned through trial, not so much trial and error, but through a lot of suffering, really. What do you do when you capture some differences? The most important ones I would first focus on are query performance differences. I'd ask myself, in terms of relevancy, if the query went from a 2 millisecond to 3 millisecond execution time, yeah, it's gonna show up in the report, but does that matter? Don't spend too much time on something like that. But if it goes from 10 milliseconds to a second, there's a big problem in there. And as somebody mentioned earlier, you're probably missing an index or something's changed in the query execution. You need to pay attention to that. But my point is, I want you to put on goggles that tell you whether this is a relevant attack or whether this is something I can just ignore and move on with my life. Is it important enough to take action on it? So that's around the query performance differences. And there are different ways to address it. Maybe you need to run analyze on the two database servers and see if you can improve the performance of the queries, etc. Maybe it needs an index. But the idea is you focused your attention. What I do is I'll open up two windows at the same time and then run the queries manually and validate. Did the tool, the PT Upgrade, actually, is it consistent? Can I reproduce the query performance differences? So that's performance, and that's something you can generally identify and know what to do with. You could talk to Percona. We could help you with recommendations on it. Are you getting different row counts? Oh, that's a big one, because that's going to be a surprise to the developers. They're not going to know that, and then you're going to be going to an app that is performing differently, and that sucks. You don't want to be in that. I wouldn't want to be in that situation. You want to make sure, are they in sync? That's your own little gut check through. Did you actually run PT table checksum? Are you sure these tables are consistent with each other? That's the first place I would start with. And then again, I'm back to the manual windows. I want to run these queries side by side and see if I can prove it out. If you capture that there's differences, you've probably, I don't know if I'm going to say that you found a bug in MySQL, which is quite rare that you're going to actually get to that point. It's probably going to be that you have data differences between your replicas. It's better that you found it earlier than later. But what are you probably or most likely going to see? You're going to see different ordering. When you run queries that don't have an order by, they will return in a certain order in 5.7 and then in a different order in 8.0. I haven't been solid on why that's always happening, because the primary keys are still the same, etc. But you get a different order by. That's okay. The way you can quickly identify that, if you're back to the side-by-side screens, you want to reproduce it. You can reproduce it quickly and without having to parse each line of a 1,000-line output, do a pager MD5 sum. And then your result set will just get crushed out to a 32 character, which doesn't matter what it says as long as your left query and your right query match. You're going to do the pager MD5 sum, run the queries, they're going to have different hashes. Oh, okay, I've shown that they have different order bys. What I then do is I run the query on both sides with the same order by. Usually the primary key is the easiest one to start with, or append to an existing order by on that query, and then when you're passing it through the pager MD5 sum, it's going to come up with eventually the same hash. And so your action is generate a report to give back to your developer and say, you need to change this query. Or ask them, does it matter? Often it doesn't. If it matters if it's going to be using the order from the database to display it on a screen, of course that matters. Or your developer will say, no, it's okay, man. I get 1,000 rows back and I sort it in app. then it doesn't matter the order coming out of the database. So again, it's back on you to have that relationship with your application development team to determine where the action needs to occur. But at least you can prove it. MD5 sum is going to, pager MD5 sum is a big help. Okay. One other thing I want to call out, there is a filter option. You can either use the filter at the PT upgrade step or at the PT query digest, the earlier one to reduce a slow log. The things I'm filtering out are any of the admin statements. Like, I just don't need to see set this or changing slow log values. What I want to do, particularly when I'm doing hundreds of environments, I want to get that file as small as possible. So I just need to eyeball actionable items in there. If they're in there and they don't match my filter, away we go. I realized I didn't include the list of filters that I use. I'm going to update the slide deck before we publish it online, so it'll be in there. So if you're going to download this later, I have probably a dozen or so that I add in there regularly, and I'll make sure that I include it. And I'm going to push a feature into PT table checksum, or it's not PT query digest and upgrade that we should have some sort of default filters in there for a bunch of stuff that just don't matter. You're not going to be able to do anything about. And I'm going to add, yeah, Kenny's already walked out the room, but I'm going to add in the replacement for my MySQL dump. Thank you. Okay. So again, please call me out if there's any, like if I'm going too fast or horribly if I'm going too slow. Okay. All right. So what are you going to get bit by? A few things. The UTF-8 is something you need to pay attention to. And I was probably overthinking it when I first started seeing this as an issue. I realized, or I was concerned of the data integrity. It was critical to me, and it still remains critical. But then I realized that in not all environments, even if they have UTF-8 declared on their table, that they're maybe not even storing any exotic character sets in there, or any characters from that set, right? So what's happening though is the default or the alias of UTF-8. If your app does set name UTF-8, it's changing from UTF-8 MB3 to UTF-8 MB4. That might be meaningful if you're into storing some exotic emojis and some other characters from some languages. I forget the list off the top of my head what those ones are.
Max index sizes, right? Don't the index sizes the max number of characters in an index? Doesn't it change when you bumped up the character set size?
I don't know how it attacks the index. Is that true?
Characters, it's different byte sizes.
No, but
No, and I think there's also extended additional characters that can be stored that couldn't be in MB3. No?
Parameter actually.
there are additional characters in MB4 that couldn't be stored in MB3. It's the extra.
Like the index
Gives you the
What that he also means, and I also have, like him, I have first-hand experience of that when you do the upgrade, there are some indices, okay, that are just common and they're just too long. You have to change it in certain cases. I've changed fields to Latin 1 because there were no characters to keep the index to be the same.
I can see what you mean. So you're talking about maybe a varchar that's fully indexed that might have, I don't know, 400 characters in it. And when it's a, yeah.
700 sub-character actually. I think they have removed that limit from 8 onwards. It was there. Some limit is there, like how many characters you can run, because it has to expand, right, in the UTF-8 on, right? So it's, I think, there's one parameter, I'm forgetting the name, but add something like 736 or something.
Okay, fair enough.
So if you search for the so variable percent like index, I think you may get that.
Okay. What I've been doing to mitigate this is if I have a table or a database that's in UTF-8, MB3, I want to make it very clear to both the customer and to myself. I'll execute the alter table and the alter database to take it to MB4 and make it so that it's very, very, very known as to what character set we're actually storing in. If you're not using UTF-8, if it's still in Latin 1, you're probably not going to have to sweat this first bullet point. Okay. How do you fix old temporal types? It needs to repair the table. You need to basically rebuild it, and it will update the data type for you, and things will just be fine going forward. Okay. Where else are you left with? So we hit this. We had changed to UTF-8 MB4, and one of the modes is that we're going to use Orchestrator to do a swap of the primary. Well, as soon as that old primary 5.7 goes under it and it's trying to replicate, I think it was the collation, it just stops. So that's one of the cases where a 5.7 won't replicate from 8 around one of the breaking things. Replication will immediately fail. Pardon? From 8 to 7. And the scenario there is, for some period of time, you know, is it working great on, you've done everything you need to, you've pointed the app to 8.0, are you comfortable? or is the customer or your development team going to say there's a rollback? So you want to have that 5.7 kicking around, right? So it's not expected to be for a long period of time, might be a few hours or a day.
For the temporal stuff, shouldn't you also add that you could ghost that table in case you don't want to take a huge impact for altering a super large table?
What do you mean by ghost it? Like just drop it?
You use ghost.
The online schema change. Yeah.
It controls the impact to your live system when you're trying to get rid of that temporal.
Fair enough. Yeah, that's a good point. So the scenario is like, how do you do these sometimes these alters that could take a significant amount of time? You've got Ghost and you've got PT online schema change that can help you get there, right? Yeah, I guess I'm being naive saying run alter table. No, you probably won't do that.
A quick comment on that also, if you're doing multiple alters on the same table, join them together.
Yeah, good point.
Don't run them back to back. Don't do alter table X, alter table Y, like on the same table.
That's right. Rebuild it all at once. Modify multiple things. Yep, that's a good point.
So, Michael, how did you fix that UTF problem when you are, replicating from 5.7 to 8 to 5.7 during the year? What do you do to fix it?
We didn't. We assumed the risk. We had upgraded multiple lower environments and we're confident that it was going to run fine on 8.0. And we made the call. We just did it. So
Something that could be affected by the slave type or allowed slave type conversions.
honestly, I think it's more that you cannot have the, I think UTF-8 MB4 general collation is available on in 5.7, but the AI-CI one I don't think is available. The 900 series isn't available on 5.7. And so, yeah, it'll say something about like user something not able to find some index of collations, right? So that might be a bit of an edge case for some people, but we run into that enough times during our migration. Another one to watch out for is just the fact that the authentication system has changed. It's gone from the native password to the caching SHA-2 for very good reasons. It's a much more secure deployment, etc. But some tools are going to break because of that. Some things that you've written, and even some of the toolkit ones, I think are still suffering under inability to authenticate cleanly.
How does the hashes for proxy SQL work with that?
I don't believe it works with it. No, I don't think you can. Do you know? Proxy SQL and caching SHA-2. I'm pretty sure that I've been rolling things back to be the native password to make it work.
Yeah, that's why I was asking, because I was pretty sure that breaks it, so that's probably should go on the watch for list
If using proxy SQL. Fair point. And I believe, Marco, if not true, Renee is not interested in changing it. Yeah.
Yeah, my conversations with him is he's more focused on trying to you have different authentication mechanisms on front end and back end as the solution rather than supporting this.
He's got a business, he's got mouths to feed, he's going to do what he needs to do.
Yeah, but still, I guess my point was just that, not just that change in that direction, you have it, like your other tools such as proxy SQL, which a lot of people use, could go south.
Very good point. Yep, very good point. It could affect you in other places. The SQL mode changes. It might affect you and it might not. The one that was dropped was the no auto create user, because in 8.0 you can't create a user with a grant statement anymore. What are the other ones I'm thinking of? There was some about the no zero in date time, or maybe I'm just relating that to changes we had made. But watch for SQL mode changes. One thing about if you're jumping big versions, this might not be immediately apparent, but you might miss some of the deprecation warnings. So if you go from 5.6 to 5.7, 5.7 to 8, you're going to clearly see in the error log that, look, this variable is working now, but it's not going to later. But if you're skipping versions, you're not going to see that. So you might get surprised, right? And what else? And I talked a little bit about the reserve word list. All it means, there's a bunch of words that you got to escape with backticks now. You don't even need to go through the list, I wouldn't say. I would just depend on the output of PT upgrade to go, ooh, this query is blowing up. Oh, look, it's using the word intersect or groups or what have you. I need to escape that with backticks. Talk to your development team about that. There's quite a long list of them, so I didn't even try to include them all. Okay, where is it going to really break? Well, this is really just about Java, and I have no love or hate for it, but oh my gosh, I don't know what's up with that JDBC driver. It just is weird. So we've renamed some variables, no big deal, but one of the bootstraps of JDBC is to connect to the database server and ask it a bunch of questions. Some of them are around variables, I suppose, that make sense. The other two, I don't know why. It asks for the query cache size and the type. JDBC wants to know that all the time. Because these two have been removed and because these two above have been renamed, boom. So I'm using it as an example. You might have a framework in your environment that depends on fetching data before it runs a query. You're going to need to pay attention to that and probably update that driver, either version-wise or modify it yourself to account for, in this case, renaming the variables or omitting the collection of query cache. What have we done? What have I done? If you're fortunate to work with a proxy SQL environment, you have the ability to modify that query on the fly. So you can basically just, in my case, regex out query cache size and just not have it there anymore. Or give it some other variable that's going to return some integer value. The point is that you can just regex away the problem. If you don't have proxy SQL, at least in Percona server, there's a rewrite plugin you can use, which can do the same thing at the MySQL D level. MySQL upstream does as well? Okay, so maybe we're even inheriting it. So it's good. It's in community and it's in Percona server. You can do this rewrite at the database level if you cannot motivate or if you cannot change the driver or the application side. Okay? Okay, what else do you want to watch for, or just some general tips? If you're not already on row-based, you should be. It's going to make your replication catch up a lot faster. You'll be able to take advantage of good parallelization. A whole bunch of optimizations are there for row-based replication. If you're not there, you should be. Also, try to use GTID. I don't think it's anywhere around performance. It's more, for me anyway, it's more legible in the sense that did I have writes occur in other places? I can quickly see that. Why do I have multiple UUIDs showing up? Or recovery from it, or GTIDs are going to make your life a much more simple, not simpler, but more understandable if you need to do any type of recovery. So be on GTID if you can get there. Orchestrator will make your life easier. And what does it say? Calm down and let Orchestrator handle it, or on the main page of the tool, right? One of those memes, yeah.
My bigger question to you on this one is, Percona doesn't officially support Orchestrator. Nobody officially supports Orchestrator right now, but you're recommending it?
I live on the edge. No, we're doing, Marco just left. We are doing bug fixes on it.
Right, but it's not an official product or support or guarantee, and that's
Fair enough. Well, I want to be cagey about that. And Marco, you please call me out on this. What Percona is doing at this point is introducing any improvements in terms of bug fixes. Are we doing features? That's probably undecided. I would not call it an abandoned project. Shalomi might not be leading it, and I don't know if we have an identified leader, but Percona won't let you hang out there.
And there's a lot of discussion on that happening, and that's why I said there's no official support. And I didn't want to call it abandoned. It's in an unknown state right now.
Fair enough. Did I say that right?
Well, that we had this discussion on the
Excuse me.
shot. So let's be clear. The problem there is not that it's abandoned. The problem is that no one is willing to take ownership of committing the changes in the main repository that Shlomi had created at the beginning. Because I have been asking for someone from the India chat to just stand up and say, just do it, because Percona is doing bug fixes and pushing the fixes upstream from already months. But nobody is pushing the button on there to say, okay, apply the fixes also on the network. We are trying to do as much as we can, but
Right now.
They do have support.
well, we had forked, we fix it, we push upstream, but there is nobody in upstream, just
And I'll catch up with you on that, because somebody did make some extra comments there that we can talk about.
I also have some chat with Long 101, right, and say, I'm ready to give it up. Just someone needs to take ownership, right? And that's we cannot.
Yeah.
As
Well,
company,
my
we cannot.
surprise here is we were just recommending it, even though it's
No,
in that
we
unknown
recommend
state.
because it's an absolutely valid tool. It's still alive, and we should do, as a community, we should do an effort and
And there's nothing better.
yes.
Yeah.
There is nothing better. It's an
Yes.
amazing tool.
So, but again, Percona can help, but because this is an open source project from the community, it should be the community that's taking ownership. We cannot do that.
Yeah.
Super fast question. Did you had GR support? I think it didn't have GR support, but
I actually don't remember. It's
That's still in the booking fork, I think.
yeah, it's the.
but is that fork public? I didn't think that fork was public.
I think they pushed that up into the, what's the name?
Sorry, guys. Yes.
Sorry, we're right at the edge. I want to just finish up my slides. Sorry, guys. Thanks. Okay, so anyway, just on the orchestrator, recommended or not, I think you should use it. It can be just in read-only to describe to you what your replication hierarchy looks like, and it will make your failover a lot easier. Okay, so it's kind of cool. If you haven't used it before, you're going to love it. Proxy SQL, a little bit more of a beast to get involved, to get implicated. If you're using it, it'll help you manage where those writes are going during your failover. Okay, well, your reads and writes, but what's important during a failover is your writes. Where are they? 5.7, stopped, starting at 8.0. You don't want to have any like, oh, I wrote a little bit here, a little bit there, back and forth. That's just going to be messy. Okay. Automation's important. Have you been able, if you have a lot of environments, particularly, have you automated your backups and restores? That's going to make your life a lot easier as you're trying to go through these routines to upgrade a lot of environments.
Super fast. I would even say, even if you don't have a lot of servers in your environment, I would still always recommend the automation. You're probably doing it at like 2 a.m. on a weekend. You don't want human error there.
Fair enough. Good point. Good point. Automation's good. Large environments are small. Last one, you got to watch the environment. Shameless plug for PMM, but use something, at least so you can visualize replication lag, and you're not just dependent on seconds behind master or anything like that, right? Use a tool that can plot things over time, and you'll educate yourself on your own environment first and foremost, and second, be able to better identify any errors that are coming out of it. Okay? How can you get some help? Well, you can go to our forums. Percona has a bit of a spiff on the inside for us to reply to tickets forum posts. So that's why you'll find we have a Slack channel where within a few seconds we're going to see that new question and we're going to go out there. If it's a very clearly formulated question, we will answer you. If you're going to say, can you give me a guide doc on how to do an upgrade? No. I mean, that's just not something I'm going to whip out in 2 minutes. But if I can answer you in 2 minutes or less, I will answer your question. I got this error. Here's what you need to do. So use our forums. They're quite popular, and you're going to get attention from anywhere from me at the principal level to any of the junior engineers. So you're going to get good coverage on your questions. Otherwise, you can be a customer of Percona. That means you can get help at the support level for reactive stuff, or you can have someone like me be in there and actually do the migration for you. All right. So Percona is here to help you with any of those types of paradigms that you get stuck in. Okay, that's it. Thank you, everybody, for the time today.